This publication and the information provided by the host and/or guest is not meant to serve as a substitute for consultation with an attorney. Specific legal issues, concerns, and conditions always require the advice of appropriate legal professionals. Any communication via this channel does not establish a client-attorney relationship. No confidential or time-sensitive information should be sent or shared.
Nobody's Business, a podcast for all those subjects we've been trained to avoid. Here's your respectfully irreverent host, Keith Shelton.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the next installment of Nobody's Business. As we've told you, this is basically a resurrection of an old radio talk show I used to have called State Your Business. I'm your host, Keith Shelton. I'm the on-air commentator, and I'm joined most occasions by my sidekick, my co-pilot, JT Shelton, my son. What you say there, JT?
Hey, everybody. I'm excited to be back.
Well, I want to tell you, just remind everybody, the purpose of what you're going to see from time to time on our podcast. We want to entertain you sometimes. We want to educate you sometimes. We want to inform you, make you laugh, challenge you, expand your horizons. And, from time to time, you're going to be seeing parodies. You're going to be seeing funny stuff. But tonight, we're going to be talking about a pretty serious subject. And we got a special guest tonight. And there he is, Jake Mahan.
Hey guys, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Long
time, avid, loyal listener to Nobody's Business from day one. Been here as a day one participant and listener. I appreciate the opportunity to partake in the show as the special guest tonight. Thank you guys.
You're the one view we've had on here since the beginning, right?
That's me.
Our one and only. What a way to pay you back.
Well, who said perseverance doesn't pay off? Water doesn't cut through rock because of its strength, but because of its perseverance.
That's exactly right.
Look, before we get kicked off, we're going to be talking about money and how it matters to everybody. Tonight's going to be a somewhat serious subject, but we're going to have moments of levity, make you chuckle. But we really want to talk about some serious stuff tonight. I want to remind everybody, please subscribe, please hit like, and please share. And we do appreciate you being with us tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about Jake Mahan. Jake graduated from Lubbock Christian University in 2010. He has an undergraduate degree, Bachelor of Science in Business Administration. In other words, some people would think he's a pretty smart fellow. Then he went on to the graduate school of banking at the University of Colorado, and he's been a commercial lender at at a local Lubbock bank. We try to avoid identities. That's just a practice that most people have on shows like this. Been a commercial lender at a really successful local bank in the Lubbock area for over 13 years, and now he is the chief investment officer for a large commercial real estate development outfit that has nationwide coverage. And so, Jake, welcome aboard. Glad to have you, and we're gonna wear you out and make you work that noggin tonight, if you don't mind.
I'm prepared, guys. Yeah, being in banking, got exposed to lots of different industries and businesses, so. I'm the epitome of jack of all trades, master of none, but I'll pitch in where I can. But the good thing for me is I've got the distinct pleasure and honor of knowing Keith and JT. And as I said before we hopped on today, I've been doing this podcast with them every day for a few years. So glad we get to do it in front of a camera tonight.
Just off air, right?
That's right.
I don't have half the credentials I think you have, Jake, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night.
That counts for something, no doubt.
Well, look, Jake, here's something on everybody's mind. Bureau of Vital Statistics and our current administration spokespeople, they'll tell you, boy, inflation's, it's only X percent and it's some low number, not compared to 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but it's some low number. But Jake, the reality is for most people, when they go to the grocery store, they're not talking about 3%, 5%, 6%. They're looking at 20% a year in the increasing cost of groceries. And so let's start off talking about inflation, Jake. Is what we hear, oh, look at that, is what we hear on the news and what's put out by the government publications, is that a real figure? Is that something that people are supposed to forget how their pocketbooks are really hurting and take that hook, line, and sinker, or how are they supposed to digest what they're hearing?
Well, Keith, Keith, I subscribe to the old adage. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, right? And you can hear all these complex explanations for why inflation is what it is. But if you just take a step back and take a look from a 30,000-foot view, you know for a fact that what we're being told inflation is and how it's actually manifested itself to the down to the consumer is totally different. I mean, what we've seen is huge inflation across every industry, all goods and services. The way that they manipulate data that's released to the public is, I mean, we still can't see behind the curtain, but it just takes a little bit of common sense to realize there's some manipulation going on behind the scenes. If you just, once again, just forget what people are telling you, use your own logical thought and just take a look at, how it's impacted your own personal financials. And it's pretty easy to tell that something's going on, and it's a lot more than 2% and 3% at a time.
Well, Jack, let's talk about, let's just hit two things that every consumer, every listener of this show, every viewer of this podcast, the gas pump and the grocery store.
Yep.
Talk to us.
Well, you can see what oil is trading at now is upwards, $70, $80. Usually that will translate differently than it is now to the consumer. I mean, it's just there's not a lot of logic in the markets right now, and it's hard to tell why that gap continues to widen. We keep seeing record days for the stock market in the last 2 months. I don't know how many record closes we've had, but you see that data, and then you look around yourself that there's companies across all these industries that are struggling. They're laying people off. They're refinancing debt. They're going into bankruptcy. And you're going, how are we hitting record highs with the stock market? You're seeing, and we may touch on this later, but credit card delinquencies increasing dramatically, mortgage defaults and delinquencies. There's the longer we wait for this to rectify itself, the bigger this bubble is going to be. What the Fed has communicated is they're shooting for a soft landing, but the longer we go on this path and the wider that gap gets, the bigger that bubble gets, the more difficult it's going to be for them to execute this so-called soft landing. And there's going to have to be some sort of retribution. I just hope that we can do it sooner rather than later and in a way that doesn't impact the nation in such a negative way that it takes us longer to pull out of it.
Well, Jake, I'm going to step up and tell you that I'm old enough to remember the days of 18% interest rates under Jimmy Carter. That's how bad it was back then. And I'm old enough to have been an adult trying to maneuver through those time periods. I said that to say this. Typically, you can you can speak in terms of patterns, conditions here, conditions over time. Things are predictable. But like you were just saying, Jake, it's like there are no predictors. It's like nothing makes sense. Well, I think you and I have had this conversation before. When nothing makes sense, what does that really tell us is the driving force for high inflation, when all the things that you're measuring by say that it either shouldn't be here, or since it is here, there should be other things that are reading certain ways and they're not. So what does that tell you? Here's what I'm going to say.
Policy.
I'm going to say it is policy driven inflation. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, I can't agree more, Keith. It's hard for me to add anything to that because you said it so accurately. But it's obvious that what should be happening is not, and the scarier part of that is there's no logical explanation that can be provided by anybody, including the people that are supposed to be in charge and making decisions. They can't, even the people that impact the economy can't describe why it's happening. It's just kind of like, look the other way. Don't worry about it. And once again, the longer we go down that path, unfortunately, the wider the gap gets, and it's going to, the more difficult it's going to be to come out of it once it does finally turn, and it will, as we know. You talk about cycles, that's been consistent, forever. There is going to be a cycle, and sometimes we need a cycle right now. What we need is something to change so we can get these rates to come down, get inflation back under control. And something has got to change. And as long as we keep manipulating data and celebrating all these big stock market days, the longer we're going to go before we actually get some meaningful change that'll trickle all the way down to us people down here working every day.
Yeah, I'm going to give you one example of what I call a policy decision that was made. And, my thing is I'm a conservative. I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. I am a conservative. And so that's the only label I care to wear. But here's what I'm going to say. You had 2%, roughly 2% inflation. Interest rates were obscenely low, probably a little too low. Then the powers that be foisted COVID on us. We know what a joke and a travesty and a terrible, terrible social experiment that was. And then you had the 2000 election. And from day one, Joe Biden started attacking the oil industry. And I say that all he did was he wanted to pick up where Obama left off in saying it's our intent to have $6 a gallon gasoline. It's our intent that most of the American population have to rely on public transportation. It was by design, and immediately oil prices shot up, and they've not come down since. I mean, all you got to do is look at, the day of the election in 2000. What was the posted prices for gasoline and diesel, and compare them to today? Nothing has changed. The administration hadn't changed, but that is a perfect example to me of where policy drove up oil and gas prices. Well, guess what? Groceries move by trucks. Trains run on diesel engines. Your automobiles, everything moves by the lifeblood of petroleum. And when that blood in those veins costs more, the increase is such a drastic increase. How could it not affect the cost of everything? JT said he just came back from the grocery store and 5 little bags, and he's got $120 something worth of grocery. We'll talk about that in just a minute, Jake. But to me, that's what I use as the example of policy-driven inflation, not necessarily market-driven inflation.
Yeah, and I'll share another anecdote, Keith, and totally agree with all that. You're spot on with that. I'm still blessed to run in some commercial banking circles, and so I still kind of get the pulse of what our bankers are being told. I have a banker that we have a very large relationship with that just came back from a conference last week, was there for a week, just these bankers trying to figure out what's going to happen. And one thing he talked about, of course, we know what drove inflation up is you go pump a couple $1 trillion into the economy. Of course, prices increase. That's the only result that can happen, right? Well, they were looking at case studies of other nations that through COVID didn't adopt the same monetary policy during that time period. And of course, what they saw was a slight recession and then a recovery, a rebound. And those nations have already come out of that time period. Well, what we did is we pumped so much money in the economy, rather than hitting that little dip, that little recession, not even a recession, but a little retraction, I should say. Instead of hitting that little retraction, we pumped so much money in the economy, we continue to rise. Where it would have been healthy to have a slight retraction and then an easy recovery, we just pumped so much money in the economy that we went the opposite direction that we should have gone, and we still are on that trajectory. You just can't throw that much money in the economy during a period of unrest and indecision and not expect inflation to just run rampant. Even at the time in March and April of 2020, I was in banking, and at the time, what's the result of this going to be? I mean, inflation's coming. I mean, we were saying that before, and if you remember back in those times when we were doing all this from a monetary policy standpoint, we were being told, don't worry, there's not going to be inflation. There won't be any inflation as a result of this. You guys will be fine. And you're just sitting there going, how can you do this from a monetary policy standpoint and there not be inflation? And so what we've done is because of policy, just blasted straight through a period where there should have been level economic conditions or a slight retraction. And what we're seeing now is the piper is we got to pay the piper. And at some point we're going to have to do that. You can't just never have the bill come due when you enact such radical policies. And so we'll just have to see how that manifests itself in the future.
If you don't mind, show that clip of one of President Biden's policy advisors on the economy.
Now, yeah, get this. This is Jared Bernstein. He is the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. This is the guy making all your policies, running the country's economy right now. This is what he had to say about what we do when we print money. What we do when we print money. You'll be astonished.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do?
Is that what they do?
They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds. Right, since they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah, so a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to,
yeah.
That clears it up for me, guys.
I'm sold. We're saved. No worries. Everybody go home. We're done with the podcast.
Oh, goodness. Jake, how do you follow that?
Well, guys, I may not talk so good, but I'm pretty sure I could handle that guy's job better than he could, and that's not because I think I'm super sharp, but holy moly, it's just I thought that was a joke the first time I saw it. I even had to do some research. Surely this is like a parody, and it is not. That is legitimately a policymaker for the greatest nation in the world, the biggest economy in the world, describing how his complete lack of understanding of how the most basic components of our policy works.
Well, Jack, part to it. One is the government prints money. He did finally get around to making that plain statement, and then they loan it. Well, here's my question: if inflation's on the rise, and we're having to borrow money to finance our government programs because we're running such huge deficits every year, doesn't that mean that in order for somebody to buy the U.S. government debt instruments, they have to pay higher interest rates as well?
Yeah, you're describing pretty basic economic policy for sure, Keith. And of course, he talks about the question that was asked of him is why don't we borrow our own money? And of course, the scary part, if you look into where we do borrow money from and who holds our all of the vast majority of our debt is, of course, a competing nation in China. And so,
well, and Jake, this is something I was blessed because I read a book in high school when I was a junior in high school for my American government class, and it was written by a former CIA guy. And the big thing is the Russian bear was the big fear. The great Soviet Union, that kind of stuff. And he kept saying, Russia's on the news, all the Russian satellite, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, winning all the Olympic medals. And that was always the direction. Look east from the U.S. and Western Europe was to look to Russia as our big enemy. And he kept, in his book, he kept saying, people, we're missing the mark. China is our real enemy. China is the silent enemy that when you study the speeches given by the Chinese generals over the last so many years, and obviously this book was written in the 1970s, so we're talking about the 50s and 60s and early 70s after World War II when communist China took over the mainland of China. He would study their speeches, and he said, you don't understand. These people think in terms of 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 2 generations. He said, we're so consumed with tomorrow and next week, we barely can think of a year down the road. He said, but I am telling you, when you see those speeches, they promise they will defeat the United States, and they will do it without firing a single bullet.
Yep.
And yet here we are. China is the largest holder of United States debt instruments of any other country in the world. And you use the phrase competitor. I'm going to use the phrase avowed enemy that simply goes silent from time to time, but nonetheless our enemy anyway.
Yeah. Go ahead, JT.
Well, I was going to say they've been buying treasury securities for the last few decades.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, how can you $800 billion in treasuries, which is like 10% of the U.S. national debt?
Yeah, and that's exactly right, JT. And of course, when you are creating, this bloated balance sheet, you have to have buyers for all of that stuff. And there's not many people that can consummate those transactions with us. And so we've played right into their hands. What makes a world power. I appreciate your commentary, Keith, about doing it without firing a shot, because that's the strategy, is not war. What makes a world power, things playing into that is education, it is military, it's things like that. But the number one thing is what's the world currency? And right now it's the US dollar, right? But China's strategy to overtake the US as the world power, which, make no mistake, that is their strategy, is to devalue the dollar and start using their own currency as the world currency. And we're playing right into their hands right now. It's kind of scary to think about. And Keith, you're exactly right on this. It's not a 1 year, 2 year deal. It's decades at a time. But we're down the timeline of devaluing the dollar so much that we're going to be trading in the stock market in yen. And I mean, that's when we will cease to be the predominant world power. And that's exactly where China is trying to attack the U.S.?
Well, listen, I was coming into my office this morning. I was listening to a news report, and well, it was a kind of a news report opinion piece. But the revelation is that China has been using the economic power that we gave them, because we buy so many Chinese products for the last 60 years. I mean, you can't go to Walmart and find an American-made product anymore. Vast majority of them made in China. Well, they're not they're not building pillows and sheets, bedspreads with that money. They're arming the military. They're spending a ton of money in their quest for domination in outer space.
You have to go completely out of your way.
Do what, son?
You have to go completely out of your way to find any American-made products.
Oh, and yeah, if you can find it.
I've spent hours trying to find American-made. I've been so upset by something I read or in an article. I go out of my way to try to find some American-made products, and it is almost impossible.
And
if you find it, it is really expensive.
Yep.
And unaffordable.
That's right.
Well, I don't care. If it may be expensive, but if I can find made in America, I'm buying made in America. It's just me. But let me finish the point I was making. China is using the economic power they got that we gave to them over the last 60 and 70 years. They are doing monetary deals with nations in strategic locations around the globe. They're not sticking to Asia. They're going into Africa. They're going into Southeast Asia. They're going into South America. And they're doing deals where they are loaning, look, watch this, loaning money to build bridges, airports, railroads, seaports. Well, when those nations can't pay that loan back, guess who now all of a sudden owns that seaport that just got built in a very strategic location, in a certain place? And, if we were going to make a whole show about it, I'd have all the specific details about this. But I've been reading about this over time. But guess who owns those hospitals? Guess who owns those seaports? Guess who all of a sudden owns the railroads? The Chinese government does, because they foreclosed on the loans that they made. Of course, those nations' leaders all of a sudden are multi-millionaires. Imagine how that money showed up in their bank accounts. But their countries had to lose sovereignty over a lot of what they used to own, even though it might have been dilapidated. It might have been, not in the best of shape. But that brand new seaport all of a sudden is owned by China. And guess whose warships are, docking there? China's. Guess whose airplanes are landing at that newly built airfield? Right? China. And so China has basically been building military bases all around the world without building military bases all around the world, using the economic power of their economy that we have fueled for decades. But that's a whole nother subject. Jake, I'm sorry I took your time.
No, that's scary for sure. And of course, just totally disingenuous in loaning the money. They have no intentions of just trying to get a little interest rate yield on that debt. It's like going to a car loan shark, but it's in the billions and trillions of dollars with competing or enemy nations. I mean, it's obvious that there's no intention of just getting some yield on some debt. It's to backdoor your way into infrastructure, and of course that's once you've established a foothold, there's not much you can do without starting a war to try to come take that back.
They don't.
Once they've taken over a seaport, and they're flying the Chinese flags and the Chinese ships are docking there, they're not going to give it up.
No, absolutely not. Well, and the bad thing is the way that they've manipulated the system. They legally own it, and so for you to then come try to do anything with it, it is an act of war.
That's my very point.
Yeah,
We would look like the bad guy if we said, look, we don't want a Chinese military base in the Caribbean. Okay?
Yep.
But that's what you're going to end up with. Hey, let's get back to the domestic issues, because we've got listeners, we've got viewers that are out there hurting, and we need to try to help them understand. I love the way our producer comes up with those funny things. All right, Jake, the national debt is projected to climb above $54 trillion in the next 10 years. Let me say, are you able to spend more than you take in at your house?
I am not. No, sir. In fact, I don't know of any entity that has that latitude except for one, and it's unfortunately our government.
Well, I mean, we're at 34 trillion now. That's another 20 trillion in the next 10 years. That's if we don't have another trumped up fake disease that has to be fought, which that was the biggest joke and travesty, and that didn't fool anybody after the first 3 months. But $54 trillion, Jake, how is the American taxpayer ever going to have anything, produce anything, leave anything to their kids, and pay off $54 trillion?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not even remotely feasible. And that's, you could get real pessimistic and say that that's by design, just to force us into a quasi-socialist economy. And I try to be optimistic about those things, and obviously we hope that we have good leaders in place to get us off of that path for sure. But it's such an astronomical number that I don't think we can really even wrap our heads around how much money that is. Like you said, I'll go back to and you boiled it down so perfectly, Keith. It's like who can spend more than they make in perpetuity? I mean, this isn't like a one-time thing. It's been a long time ago since I've seen this, but you look at, and obviously inflation plays a role in this, but how long it took us to get our first $1 trillion in debt, and then how quickly we got from 1 to 30. It'll blow your mind. You'll look at that and go, we're going to be in $100 trillion in debt before we even can blink. Just because the velocity at which we're ballooning that number is terrifying, because we are, and what's scary now, and you mentioned, what happened through COVID, is they've now utilized that lever in economic times. We'll just pump a bunch of money in the economy. And it's hard to, once you've done that once, not to continue to do that. And so what happens if we do have a recession, or when we do have a recession? If we don't have the right leadership in place, they're going to go pull that lever again. Is what's scary. Yeah. I mean, if we have another if we don't achieve a soft landing, quote unquote, and we end up having a deep, long recession, what's to say they're not going to go pull that same lever? Because it worked once. I mean, it'll drive that economy back up again for sure. And you may have some short-term benefits, but what we're seeing is just the very tip of the iceberg on the long-term consequences.
Well, Jake, this is going to reinforce something of what we've already said. When you have a policy-driven inflation rather than market-driven inflation, the normal things that you would do to cool the economy, to get interest rates to finally drop, is you would raise interest rates to cool the economy, so that wages wouldn't be going up so high, costs wouldn't be going up so high, people would quit spending. And so with higher interest rates, that's what you would expect. But now we've had 2 years of higher interest rates, and it seems like every month when the next report comes in, guess what? It's not having the effect. It's not cooling.
For sure, Keith. The analogy that I've heard that's easy, I think, to understand is, think of interest rate monetary policy as a gas pedal and a brake pedal, right? If you want to step on the gas, you lower rates. If you want to stomp on the brakes, you raise rates. Well, what you're seeing is we're stomping on the brakes at a historic level. Rates have been this high and higher in the past, but they've never increased at the velocity that we've seen recently. This is what's different about this time than the past, is just how rapidly we have increased rates. It's never before been seen. You can't slam on the brakes harder than what we've done in the last 2 years. And what you're seeing is, as far as what you look at the data, no impact. And that's what's scary is if you're in a speeding car and you slam on the brakes and you don't slow down, where are you headed? I mean, you're headed to a crash.
Our brakes are gone.
Somebody cut the brakes.
There are no brakes. Somebody cut the lines. We're relying on physics and friction right now to try to slow down.
Well, let me give you another one, Jake, that's out there that people are having to deal with. Just like the interest rates, the Fed raised the interest rates, which meant it was more costly for people to borrow money. That's business people and consumers. And naturally, what's immediately going to track with the Fed borrowing rate would be your commercial borrowing rate. And then guess what else would track with that? Your mortgage rates. Well, we got mortgage rates. Let's see. Right now, current rate for 30-year fixed is around 7.55. That should cool the demand for housing. It should eventually lower the cost of housing. So as prices go down, they become more affordable. That's been the formula. But is that what we're seeing? Or is this another example of, because it was policy-driven inflation rather than market-driven inflation, the normal fixes aren't having the expected effect, even though that's what we're being told by the brainiacs, like the one we just watched on the video a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I got another anecdote for you, and obviously, I'm relatively young in my career, and as I went through banking and even got a graduate banking degree in Colorado, they talked about this mystic phenomenon where you have an inverted yield curve, right? And it's like, hey, this very rarely happens. You may not see it, but if you're ever getting close to an inverted yield curve, you better batten down the hatches. Something bad's coming. And if it ever does actually invert, you better be prepared for serious economic turmoil. Well, looking back, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal last week. We've been in an inverted yield curve for 18 months, and here we are hitting record highs in the stock market. And there's no way that should be possible. I mean, it was like, if you get close to this, something's going to crash.
Record profits.
Yeah. There's no logic behind it. That's for sure. I mean, every alarm and bell and whistle is going off, and we're continuing to just accelerate.
Well, here I'm going to read some statistics, Jake, and basically it's a matter of the signal is that even though the government has told us we're on our way, we're as good as it's been in a long time. We're on our way to recovery, and things are really, really going good. I can't help it. You run out of gas on the side of the road. Just trust me, it's all better. All right, listen to this. Fannie Mae forecasts the average 30-year fixed rate to drop to 6.4% by year end. There's one big problem. In February, they were predicting it was going to drop to 5.9. Yeah. Big difference. The Mortgage Bankers Association now predicts mortgage rates at 6.4% by year end. However, in January, they were saying it was going to go to 6.1%. Mm-hmm. The National Association of Realtors expects rates to average 7.1% this spring before settling at 6.5%. But at the start of the year, they had predicted 6.3%. Wells Fargo published a report that said there will be a rate of 6.5% at year end, but in January, they were saying it was going to be 6%. So, Jake, all the trends are saying if it gets better at all, it's really, really slow if it happens at all.
Yeah, and you guys may or may not know this, but what the main driver for mortgage rate pricing is the 10-year T-bill. And so what you're looking at when you're looking at mortgage rates is based on what a rate's going to be 10 years from now. And when you're seeing rates continue, and the mortgage rates went up again today. We keep hearing, as you described, Keith, that okay, they're going to go down, they're going to go down. But this is something that, you know, what people tell you and then what you can actually go investigate and look at are totally different. Because one thing you do know is banks aren't in the business of losing money, and so they don't buy the bull crap that gets printed in the paper. They price off of what's the 10-year treasury trading at, and they're raising mortgage rates, where the primary driver on that's a 10-year T-bill, which just means they're expecting rates to be higher for longer. And I mean, I think that's what we can anticipate outside of what could potentially is potentially possible, of course, is a deep recession. But barring that, I think we're going to see rates continue to stay high. They're trying to appear optimistic to the public and tell us what rates are going down. In the meantime, how they're actually operating is that they're not, which is not news to people's ears, but it's something you need to be prepared for and educated on. That 10-year T-bill is an important rate to track if you're wanting to see where your rates are really going to go, especially in the mortgage sector.
Well, Jake, President Biden gave an interview to CNN yesterday, and believe it or not, when CNN starts to question your fiscal policies, domestic fiscal policies, boy, you've lost a major ally.
Something's wrong.
Yeah. Well, and here was his rebuttal when she was asking about the consumer spending, consumer confidence, how tough it is out there. That it's just, is he not worried about how it's going to affect his chances of being reelected, that sort of thing? And he said something to the effect of, the American people have got plenty of money and they're going to keep spending it, something to that effect. I mean, if somebody wanted us to get the video clip, we could, but it's so totally out of touch. And I'm going to read you some statistics.
I'm surprised it wasn't her under pressure.
All right. Consumer spending has been strong. Jake, do we agree?
Well, in some ways, I'd say consumer spending's been strong, but once again, this is a result of policy, right? They went and pumped all these tens of thousands of dollars into people's bank accounts. It's a false sense of security if you're looking at, trailing economic data. And what I think is obviously clear, if you can go look at auto delinquencies, at credit card balances, at student loan defaults, is that people have run out of that stimulus money. That floated people for a long time. They got bloated savings accounts. People had more money in their savings account than they'd ever had in their life. And it propped us up through, people, taking vacations and still continuing to buy goods and services through a period of time. And so while there truly was strong spending through a period of time, it wasn't as a result of earning power, or it wasn't to minimize inflation. It was a facade.
Well, Jake, that was exactly the point I was going to make. They continued to spend in the direct face of ever increasing interest rates and ever increasing cost of whatever it is they're trying to buy. And guess what the report now is that consumer spending is cooling dramatically.
Sure.
Why? Well, you touched on it. Savings are depleted.
They're gone.
And credit cards are maxed out. People have what's the phrase, Jake? Their credit limit, they're maxed out on the credit cards.
Yep.
And the number of delinquencies is as high as it's been in 20-something years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an auto loans is the same way. I think something that I don't hear many people talk about, but I think is also a big contributor. The credit card limits and auto delinquencies, that kind of stuff, primarily is impacting people I mean, it impacts everybody, but it impacts people probably under the age of, call it 50, much more substantially than it does others. Well, what's something that's happened a lot recently for people in that age group is they've taken on all the student loan debt. And what happened through COVID is also policy driven, Keith, is what happened with student loan payments. Nobody made them for 4 years. And then the whole talk was, well, these are all going to get forgiven. People got used to being all these people that live paycheck to paycheck, not having the $600 student loan payment every month for multiple years. And then with the promise of, well, don't worry, you're never going to end up having to come back and make those payments. And they operated like they believed that. And they built a life and a budget around that. And then, of course, what happened, what we knew would have to happen, someone's got to pay those loans back. And so those loans went back into repayment in the last, 4 or 5 months. And so I think that's had a dramatic impact on what you're seeing on credit cards, student loans, mortgages, all that stuff. Is all of a sudden these people have the $600 payment that they didn't think they're going to have anymore, and that's a big deal to a lot of consumers.
Here's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Well, I like that one. Here's what I'm going to say, Jake. I had to have student loans for my law degree. I paid it back. I don't care to take my resources and pay somebody else's student loan, especially when you got a degree in underwater basket weaving. I mean, that's a new topic. Let's pivot and we'll pick up a new topic.
Well, if we're picking up a new topic, I think now is a good time for one of our sponsors. We've got the Rainbow Brick Company. We'll take a quick break, come back, and we'll hit our next subject.
Can you stay with us? I want to say this. We'd like to say howdy to another of our fine sponsors, the Rainbow Brick Company, from right there on the main drag in Kittiquay, Texas. And we thank Mr. and Mrs. Premert for making our podcast this evening possible. Yep, Roger and Earlene developed a process a number of years back where they could bleach that deep red out of that red sand and rock there at their quarry located right there outside of town using a special formulation of Clorox bleach and a secret ingredient. And then they can infuse that clay with that bleached sand and rock and add back any color of the rainbow of your choosing. Custom bricks for any of your building needs of the color of your choice. Go by and see Roger and Earlene at their offices and sales showroom. They'll be glad to see you and help you with your next custom brick purchases right there on Deer Park Road in the heart of the big old metroplex of Kittiquay, Texas. Well, Jake, welcome back. We do want to thank Earlene and Roger being a sponsor of our show right there in Kittiquay, Texas. And Jake, we pivoted. We're going to talk about the worthlessness of a college degree these days. What's your thoughts?
Okay. I think it's obvious that if you start doing ROI calculations on college degrees, that's a much more difficult proposition anymore to go through that. I think employers are not looking for those as much as they used to, not valuing those as much. I still think there's times and situations where that's the right thing to do. When you're going into an industry that requires that, you're going to get an education that legitimately offers you better opportunities going forward. But just going to get one for the sake of getting one and going to get one at an Ivy League school, it's a totally different proposition nowadays. That landscape has changed significantly. Obviously, with the adaptation of virtual and that kind of stuff, and that can be a whole nother conversation. But I think it's the college degree value proposition is a difficult one to swallow unless you really go with a purpose and follow through and do things in a forward-looking manner, so looking at the future and ways that it can benefit you going forward.
Jake, let me ask you, what are the prospects of a graduate with a big student loans from an Ivy League college. They spent half their senior year protesting against Israel, and they ended up getting a degree in gender studies. What's the value of that degree, you think, on the open market?
Yeah, it's not good. In fact, it's less than zero because you're obviously in crippling debt with no legitimate options to repay that, which is why you see, unfortunately, that enter the political sphere as a way to manipulate people and to get votes. You know, running on a platform that's not feasible, but to promise some sort of student loan forgiveness or those kind of things. It's like a do-over card or whatever. And it's, I mean, once again, there's just, it doesn't make any logical common sense if you just take a step back and look at it. And it's, yeah, that higher education is in an interesting spot today. There's no doubt.
But you've actually got alumni from some of the well-known universities, most of them liberal arts universities. They have pulled their funding because of how little regard they have for what the colleges and universities are putting out as you know, what will one day be future leaders of our country. And I'm going to throw this out to you. We all know what STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM is what it's called for short. You know that there are a number of colleges and universities, and I'm telling you this to take you to a corollary to what I'm fixing to say. They do not have a single U.S. born candidate in their doctoral programs.
Yeah.
They are all foreigners. Now, is that because we're fat and sassy and you just got better things to do? Or is it probably because we're not preparing our kids to take those kinds of tough courses? So naturally they gravitate to gender studies and underwater basket weaving and all the other nonsense degrees that I've seen evidence of in the last 20 years. What's your take on it?
Yeah, well, and you know, I've touched on this super briefly earlier, but it's become a germane point now in the conversation that the other part of you know, a factor in becoming a world power is education, and having strong education systems and educating our children well. You know, I'll tell you this: I got a couple really smart kids. I got a third grader and a fifth grader. They both just last week took their MAPS test, which is a national test that's standardized across the whole nation. My kids are sharp, don't get me wrong, but my third grader is reading above a high school senior level for the average in America. He's sharp, guys, but he shouldn't be, there's no senior in high school that should be reading at a lower level than my third grader. It's, you know, you go look at some of these big metro areas and what the schools are like. It's, you know, it's scary. Yeah, and we're definitely, once again, we're talking decades here. But as we have, I saw another article recently about, it was in Chicago, and it was talking about these teachers that were looking for dramatic pay increases. And don't get me wrong, I come from a family of educators, and these teachers do the Lord's work, but they're wanting this big, like 51% raise. Their proficiency level in math was 12%. They had 12% of their students in their school district that were the bare minimum threshold of education. They had 12% that had achieved the bare minimum level, and I mean that's tough right there. And I think we could spend a whole nother few hours on what that is, and I think a lot of that's not just on the school systems. There's some family dynamics there that unfortunately have. There's trends of that deteriorating in places as well, and that's a shame as well. But yeah, school system education is a vital part of America maintaining our status in the world for sure.
Well,
And I was just going to say, I very few years ago, I went to school. I was going to school for a bachelor's in aviation, and obviously I'm a young kid. I can't afford this by myself. There's policies that are put into place that it was during the Obama era that you had to rely on your parents' income up until you were, I think, 23 years old, 26, or it's 23 or 26.
I don't remember what it was, but yeah, I remember those days.
I could not for the life of me. I was on my own, paying rent, living my own, paying rent, working a job. I had to have on my grant request, on my student aid request, I had to show my parents' income. And my parents made too much money to qualify. I mean, they said, okay, you qualify for like $300 for the semester. And I couldn't do something on my own. Obviously, I'm going to school because I don't have a degree and I don't have a good paying job. I'm trying to go to get an education to get into those things. But because of policy, I had to rely on help from my family to do that. That's one of the challenges you face as an American, student here, is if you don't have the money to go to college, but you are on your own, you work on your own, you live on your own. Now, because the government made a policy change, you have to tell them what your parents make. And they're like, okay, well, your parents make too much money. You can't do this. Your parents have to help pay for this. Well, going through what I was going through, I started getting into understanding what I was going to be making out of college. I was going to be racking up six figures in debt in flight time, plane rentals, flight training, tests, everything else. I was going to be in the six figures for debt. And unless I went to the military and went through a military officer training after college and then went to an airline, I was going to come out of school making food stamp wages. How was I going to pay that debt off and feed a family? And that's just one of many things I think people, are facing when they go to schools. More people are going into college thinking, all right, I'm going to try this out. And then they get into it and they see what it's about and they start realizing what they can make. And they're like, this isn't worth it. I'll go to a technical school, spend $10,000 and get a license and go make, $60K a year. That's just one aspect of why the education system's, I think, failing us right now, and the cost of college is leading to a shift.
Well, JT, that's a great point you make. Jake, I'm gonna throw this statistic out to you. This came from Mike, an article that Mike Rowe did. Remember, anybody who knows who Mike Rowe is?
Dirty Jobs.
Dirty Jobs guy, yeah.
Yeah.
I tell you, I could listen to him for a long, long time before I think I would hear something I don't agree with coming from him. He makes tons of sense on so many levels. But enrollment in vocational community colleges are up 16% in the last 5 years. 16% increased enrollment in trade schools. How about that?
Yeah, should be higher. I'll just tell you, I'm in the construction world, and I'll just tell you, there's a need for that skilled labor, and you can make a dang good living. I've got a family member that's an electrician, and that guy, he's a sharp guy, and he works his butt off, but he's been incredibly successful in with minimal education. It's just going and let's say something optimistic here today. There's still a place for people that are willing to work hard and learn a valuable skill. And so, if you want to get out there and get your hands dirty, you're not afraid to put some work in, there's a lot of opportunity to be really successful. And so that's still true. And there is such a need of skilled labor, and that does not mean educated labor. That means skilled labor. And so I think you're going to continue to see that shift. I hope. And one thing I've seen that's encouraging about schools, I'll say something else optimistic. You started to see those trades start integrating their way into secondary education in high schools. There's a lot of more programs here locally where we're at in West Texas where you can start getting some of those certifications in high school. Those guys can step out of high school and make dang good jobs. And those are guys that maybe and gals that maybe not typically are going to walk into a good situation at high school if they're not going to go to college or don't have the ability to. And so I can't encourage people enough if you're doing that value proposition for college, or it's just not something you want to do, you got a bright future still ahead of you if you're just willing to go work your butt off. There's always going to be a place for people that'll do that.
Well, let me say this. When back in the dark ages, before they electrified schools and homes, we used to have shop and home ec. Well, you learn a lot in shop, and that was a great trade program for high schoolers. Then they quit it. They just quit it. Schools started dropping it. That and home ec. There's so many of the schools just did away with them. Now out here in Texas, you have the FFA programs that are very strong and I think very good, and they're teaching things like welding and other trades like that, agriculture. At a high school level, of course. But Jake, when you take a kid like that that's learned welding in high school, or learned woodworking, or carpentry, or brick masonry, or something like that in high school, then he goes to a 2-year trade school, that guy or gal can get out and after the first year, if he just shows he's awake and don't spend his time smoking dope or whatever, he's making $90,000 a year, and guess what? No student debt.
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt. Easy. You can do that. Yeah, welding's a great example. That's another thing in West Texas. Yeah, you get your welding certificate. You go make 6 figures day one out oil field or wherever you want to go. And that's the other thing. The connotation with some of those maybe quote unquote blue collar jobs is changing, and that's certainly that's a well respected profession. A lot of those trades, just there's been a shift in admiration for that, just because that's a super necessary trade. And so yeah, there's plenty of opportunity out there. Like I said, people just get out and work. The thing is, you can and anymore, people that get out and work, you can separate yourself from a lot of folks already. You're going to be top 10% of folks. You just get out there and bust your butt a little bit. Don't matter what you want to do.
Well, Jake, we're not ready to pivot again yet. So let's stay on this topic a little bit. From your experience as a banker, you talk to business people left and right. I've had a lot of people tell me jobs. There are plenty. They go empty, or weeks and weeks and months unfilled. That's the complaint of employers. What did you see in your banking days? Did you have employers making those same kind of moans and groans to you?
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's jobs out there for sure. It's just a matter of finding people that want to plug in and do the work. And we talked about all these different vocations where you can go make a bunch of money right on day one, and that's great. But there's a lot of situations where you just got to go in, put your nose down, and get to work, and the money comes later. I came out of school with a graduate degree, graduated, summa cum laude, had a successful academic career from that standard. I was making $28,000 a year, for a long time out of school. But instead of hopping around and feeling entitled and whining about it, I just kept working hard. And guess what? You start rising through the ranks pretty quick when you've got employers. As long as you want to pick a place where you respect the people that you work for, so you can work for people that have good values, will value whatever your effort and work you're putting in. But if you're in a place working for good people and you work hard, you're gonna rise through the ranks and get where you want to be. And there shouldn't always be the expectation that where you're starting is where you're gonna, that doesn't mean that's where you're gonna finish. Sometimes you got to get in, especially if you're young, and just show people you're willing to work. But once you do that, you're going to rise through the ranks pretty quickly, and you'll have new opportunities as you continue to just do the next right thing.
Well, I'm going to repeat. I'm not going to repeat, but I'm going to go back a little bit. If you watch the news and you watch these reporters talk to these protesters, that they've got on the college campuses right now, I mean, half of them can't make complete sentences.
Yeah.
You want to, number one, what a waste of whatever you or your parents have spent on you. And number two, what a terrible job the college or university has done of trying to prepare you to get out and do something that's worth something and effective. I mean, it's like the communication skills are horrible. Analytical processing of problem solving, things like they don't have. Let me say this. I would say that instead of education, our institutions are spending way more time on indoctrination.
Yeah.
And not teaching and preparing. That's just me.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's almost like I see in the college campus protesting on the Israel and Hamas and all that stuff. I almost it doesn't make sense to me, and I almost feel bad for some of these kids because it's like I don't think they even know what they're doing. I think it's just I think there is an indoctrination for sure, and it's not even like in some instances that the school, you know, not only do they not vehemently oppose them, sometimes they support them in that, and it becomes we're championing this freedom of speech, and it becomes this mob mentality of just a bunch of idiots just doing it because they think it's the thing to do and not really having any critical thought on what I'm doing or what are the implications that I'm doing or what am I supporting. And it's really sad. I feel it's disappointing, and it's like you just want to go, do you guys realize what you're doing right now? I mean, I'm all for free country and freedom of speech, but it feels like people are taking this just totally asinine political stance because it's cool to be a contrarian, and anymore throughout all different aspects of our culture right now, that contrarian view, the more wildly contrarian you can be, the more champion you can be, and the less anyone can oppose you, because then you become some sort of whatever it is. Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's just it's yeah it's just interesting times for sure.
Well, Jake, that's a good phrase. And here's what I'm going to say. Here's what I'm going to ask you and challenge you about. We've talked about the fact that right now it's tough. People are looking for solutions. People, when it comes to voting, here's what I say: quit voting for anybody who cannot go to Washington, D.C. and say no.
Yeah.
If they demonstrate they do not have the ability to say no, then don't vote for them. And if they demonstrated they have that in their bill, don't put them back in.
Yeah, you'll know pretty quick because there's plenty of opportunities. You go to DC to find a good situation to tell them no in. That's for sure.
And it's just like they can't. Once they get up there, it's they agree to everything, and it's nothing's going to change.
It's more about protecting their position and their status than it is doing what the right thing to do is.
Yeah. Well, I said that to say this: it's tough out there. It's tough out there for our listeners, our viewers, the average family. But you just said you got two small kids. How are you going to try to raise your kids, and what advice would you give your kids in how to be able to let's see. I like the phrase "a cut above the rest."
Yeah.
That was always through my coaching years. I always told my kids, I want you to do everything thinking that your standard is you will be a cut above the rest, because everybody else is going to be average. You'll never be a championship ball player unless you believe that you're going to be a cut above everybody else. By the time you spend your time on the field or spend your time on the court, that's where you want to be. You don't want to be average. So how would you talk to your kids? What would you be telling your kids of how to prepare themselves to navigate what appears to be some tough times that we don't necessarily have a short answer to right now?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to do this, Keith, because for me personally, that's a pretty easy answer, and that's got to do with my faith and my belief in Jesus Christ and my Lord and Savior. And I hope that I can use any platform I'm on to champion that, because that's the most important thing. And by no means am I coming at that with a sense of any condemnation for anyone else, because Lord knows I'm far from perfect and I made plenty of mistakes in my life. But the best way for me to try to mold my children, we got a playbook for that, Keith. And that's reading our Bible. That's praying every day. There's you read that thing front to back, you'll see all kinds of examples of how we're called to a higher purpose, and we're called to be, you know, to a higher standard than what we're going to see in the world. The path is narrow, and it's important just to communicate that to my kiddos. There's a clear, playbook for integrity and how to deal with other people, and not to condemn, but to love people, but to also hold yourself to a different standard than just what's best for me, what's easiest for me. It's thinking about how to treat other people, and what's most important in life. There's all these challenging things out there, but praise God that those things aren't eternal, and there is something that is. And so, there's always going to be some pain and suffering while we're here, but what I tell my kids is all that stuff's temporary, and there's eternity in heaven. And so that's my personal choice for how to address that with my family, my kids, and we're very secure in that. And we've talked a lot about challenges and things that are difficult, but I've still got a very optimistic perspective on life, just knowing that my salvation's secure, and whether I'm have challenges or issues or struggles here, eternally I'll be made whole.
Oh, Jake, Jake, you and I are definitely on the same page with that. It's a case of the tougher it looks like things can be down here. Well, I tell you what, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this statement. I believe this will be the way we can pivot to another subject. I'm not an expert on prophecy, but by my reading and studying and trying to listen to preachers who do want to talk on end times and things like that, there is nothing that you can describe in prophecy that you could point to and say, well, that's the United States. It's not there. So is it soon? Is it 100 years from now? We don't know. But these are tough times. These are times that it seems like the more we observe the things that we used to think we could count on, it's like we talked a while ago, Jake, they're not working. The predictions we thought we could make, those predictions aren't coming true. The things we thought we could rely on, they don't have the same effect they had 20 years ago, 40 years ago, and when Ronald Reagan was trying to help us recover from the Jimmy Carter years. Okay, so I'm with you. I believe as we do approach the end times, we are going to be, if we're believers, our confidence is going to grow stronger. Our faith is going to grow stronger, and then we're going to have to be the ones that lead others, because we'll be the only ones that would be even keeled, steady, showing strength in the face of adversity, and people are going to look for that. They're going to look for people, because non-believers will not know what to do or where to turn to. And it'll be people like you and your kids and JT that, 20 years from now, people are going to be gravitating to you. They want to know, they're going to want to know what you know. And that's an opportunity. But until the Lord comes back, we're here living in a real world. We got to deal with these issues and problems. And so I've got one more subject I want to bring up to you, and then we can finish it. JT, we got another sponsor to mention.
Yes, sir. We'll do this last plug, and then we'll do our last topic and wrap up. I know Jake's a working man; he's got to get back to work.
Come on down to the Sunshine Baking Company in Buckafunny, Mississippi for all your baking needs. We'll really melt your butter and butter your buns. All promotions are the fault. I mean, they're the product of the twisted. I mean, fabulous imagination of Keith Shelton.
We do want to thank the Sunshine Baking Company for being one of our sponsors from right there, actually Buckatona, Mississippi. Jake, we're back. I got one more thing we want to cover before we go, and you and I have talked about this before. And right now, it is the legal climate in the state of Texas. It's, let's call it jackpot justice, if you would. I mean, I've shown you the $125 million jury verdict in Reagan County. I've shown you the $301 billion jury verdict in Nueces County, Texas. The 300 was a dram shop case. That was a case of a bar that sold to a customer and was too inebriated to properly operate his motor vehicle and went out and killed a grandmother and a child. And, that was bad enough for sure. And then today, I'm sorry, a couple of days ago, I heard of a $430-something million jury verdict that was nothing but actual damages. And I've told you how that they arrive at that. They've gotten to where they don't even bother putting on economic putting on evidence as to the economic value of the person they lost. Okay. And what that basically means is what their annual wages were over a 5-year period of time, how long into the future they expected to earn those wages and that sort of thing. All that was pure. I'm trying to think of what the word would be, but you could calculate actual damages, the actual value in a dollar, and put a dollar sign in front of it, of the value of the person that particular family lost, and what it would take, what the economic impact would be on that family. Well, nowadays they don't even bother with that. They go straight to, and here's what they are: pain and suffering past, and put a blank; pain and suffering future, put a blank; loss of consortium, companionship, and society, past; loss of consortium, companionship, and society, future. And each one of those 4 categories has a blank, and the jury literally fills the blank in with a number. And what we're seeing is those numbers are unbelievably outrageous. Now, it's like I told y'all, for those of you who tuned in last time, punitive damages can be and will be limited, if they're too high, by considerations of the U.S. Constitution. Okay? However, actual damages can only be dealt with by the trial judge. Well, in the old days, the trial judge would do it. I'm throwing this term out there, and for the uninitiated to be, you wouldn't know what it means, but the legal term is remediator. And basically what that means is the judge says, well, based on the economic value of the decedent, I just find that these soft, non-pecuniary awards are just too high. And so I'm going to cut 100 million back to 40 million. I'm going to cut 100 million back to 20 million. And judges could do that because there was a rational basis there. But when you've got a system where you're no longer even required to put on the economic value of the person that the family lost, it's whatever the jury comes up with, and the judge has no basis no rash. In other words, if he was going to try to reduce an actual damages award of the type I've just told you about, he has no rational basis to do it. So it pretty much has to stand. Okay. Yeah. So you now being aware of that, and I think I told you 2 days ago, I found out about another jury verdict. Now I'm trying to get a copy of it. 430 something million. It was 100% actual damages. Tons of pressure on insurance companies. Tons of pressure on insurance companies to settle cases. Okay. Not to mention what can happen when you find out they're not going to settle. When they can't settle, they're going to be forced to pay policy limits. And then whoever the judgment debtor is, they're basically left on their own. And Jake, you may not have been aware of this, but well, yeah, you did. You said you were the one viewer from last week. But I mean, you're a Walmart greeter. After the plaintiff creditor gets through with you. So I said that to ask you this question. From your days as a banker, I mean, what is the discussions with business people, your farmers, your ranchers, your manufacturing customers you had? What are the thoughts now, Jake, when we're faced with these kind of things in Texas?
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I think half the battle is just education on what exposure looks like, because what you see with basically every entrepreneur and business owner, they are super passionate and super good at their business, right? Very few of them are attorneys, but they're good at, whatever it is, running a grocery store, running a construction company. Yeah.
Hey, my favorite phrase is the widget maker loves to make widgets.
That's right. And no truer words have been spoken, Keith. Those guys, they walk in and they stare at their inventory every day and just take a deep breath, and they're so proud of what they built, right? And they are experts at what they do. And what they are not is legal experts most of the time. And a lot of times they don't even know what that exposure is. And what's a shame is what you can spend 30 years building and being an expert in, and just blood, sweat, and tears into this can be eliminated in just one fell swoop. And so for me, as a banker, a good banker is more than just somebody that gives you money, right? It's a trusted advisor. And what you want to do as part of that role is let people know, hey, you need a good CPA because you're not any good at doing financials. You need a good attorney because you don't know what kind of exposure you have. And what you don't want to do is see somebody's life's work just be completely decimated over one tiny thing. And what's been interesting in the trend in these jury verdicts is, I think your standard jury pool has just lost total touch with reality on what dollars and cents mean. And they feel like they see, poor little plaintiff over here deserves to win the lottery. And there's a complete loss of perspective on the fact that this is a business owner over here on the other side that's also a real person. And of course, usually in these situations, it's a terrible situation. No one's saying nothing should happen. But when you're getting the kind of rulings and verdicts like you're describing, Keith, that's just not based in reality. And there's two parties in this deal. And so the main thing you can do in this climate where juries just feel like they want to be part of some sensational verdict, which I think a lot of what we're describing, that's what it is. It's just like they want to be like Santa Claus giving out hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're doing it through our judicial system. And it's just a matter of counseling people that, hey, asset protection is a massively important part of your business. The way the care that you treat your business with and what you need someone protecting you that has an expertise in the care for asset protection for you. So you can, if you're in a difficult situation like that, your life's work isn't completely blotted out by some crazy verdict.
Jake, your connection seems to be a little weak, but stick with us.
Okay.
Okay. Well, Jake, you and I have talked about asset protection planning, segregating assets, using multiple business entities like LLCs, that sort of thing. Let me give you the benefit of a conversation I had just today with an insurance representative. He works for one of the largest insurance agencies that provides coverage on a very big regional scale. And let me tell you what he said these jury verdicts are doing to trucking companies. And it's going to surprise you where I'm going to end up before I quit talking. So many smaller trucking companies are going out of business. They're merging when they can, or they're trying to sell out when they can. Do you want to know why?
Tell me.
The reason why is because the number of insurance companies in the state of Texas who will still write trucking company insurance is getting smaller and smaller by the day. And so what you've got is a much narrower list of possible people who will write insurance, and they're getting much more picky about who they will insure. So what happens to a trucking company when that trucking company cannot get the required liability insurance? Those trucks stop. Those trucks stop. Those bank accounts quit getting deposits put into them. Those employees get laid off, or they're going to have to merge or get bought out. And that's the climate right now. So, all right. So I told you I was going somewhere with bringing this point up. How do you think your grocery store shelves get stuff put on? Trucks.
Yeah.
The clothes you wear, trucks. The shoes you put on your feet, the shoes and boots, the furniture you sit at to eat your supper at, trucks. We were talking about the reason he and I were talking about is yes, and Jake, thank you for making the plug about asset protection planning. Asset protection planning is a discipline in and of itself, and we touched on it a little bit last time. We'll probably have a whole show dedicated to it sometime in the future. But Jake, that's the pressure to, for example, I was told the other day by a Mississippi attorney friend of mine, Mississippi has enacted, I knew there was tort reform coming years ago, but he said there is a flat out cap on non-economic soft damage awards under the category of actual damages. And in other words, if the jury in Mississippi were to award something like came out in the Reagan County case of $120 million for pain and suffering, loss of consortium, companionship, society, the non-measurable kinds, then there's a statute that says that total award for that one beneficiary can only be X. So, Jake, my question to you is, have you heard any talk about tort reform in that regard in the Texas legislature?
I haven't, Keith. That's something that, once again, you've got to constantly stay educated so you know what your exposure is for sure.
You got to have advisors and trusted advisors to advise you on that stuff.
That's exactly right.
Well,
the widget maker likes to make the widgets, and the attorneys like to stay on top of that stuff.
You need them both.
Yeah. Jake, look, thank you for your time tonight. We've gone over. We were hoping we would stick to an hour, and I don't think any of our time together was wasted. But we've turned it into an hour and a half program. But boy, you've been a great guest, and thank you so much. It's such a blessing to receive from you and to be on the receiving end of what you shared with us and our listeners and viewers. And so, Jake, thank you so much for coming on with us.
I didn't have to earn my keep tonight. You did all the talking.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Love what you guys are doing. Glad I could be a small part and be the wall that we could bounce some stuff off of, so we could get some wisdom from Mr. Shelton over here. Always look forward to learn something new every time. Keith gets to impart some wisdom, and that's something God's blessed you with, Keith. It's just being able to teach and to train and to counsel. So appreciate everything you do for me, and appreciate this opportunity to be here, guys.
Well, thank you, Jake. We're going to have you back. There's a possibility we'll take some of these subjects and we'll zero in on them and do them in greater detail. And sometimes we'll pivot. And I know you gave a little bit tonight, but I mean, there are times you can join us with, when we want to talk about spiritual topics. Lord, we get to talking about that. We can go for hours.
No doubt.
Without being interrupted. So anyway, thank you, Jake. For you viewers and listeners, thank y'all for joining us. I hope you picked up on something. I hope you benefited from it and were blessed. And so I'm going to say good night. JT, you want to sign us off?
Yeah. Those watching at home, don't forget, like, subscribe, follow, share. We're trying to go live every week, Thursdays at 8:00 Central. Can't wait for the next show, and maybe we'll have another special guest. Won't be as special as Jake, I'm sure, but we can't have him on every show. He's our only viewer. But from us here at Nobody's Business, just thanks again, Jake. Always a pleasure. Appreciate your time and your wisdom, and especially value your spiritual take on how you would address those things with your kids. But we'll see y'all next week.
Thank you, guys.
All right.